living things as well as their environment, as well as the non-living things around them. Okay? So, as I just explained, we talk about an ocean ecosystem, and we would talk about the fish and the bacteria, the algae, the plants, but also the water and the sand and the rock and the oxygen. So it's all of those pieces put together. That's what ecology is, the study of all those things and how they interact with each other. All right, so we'll start with talking about sort of, when we think about the world, how do we sort of break it into pieces so that we can study it? We start with an ecosystem. And basically an ecosystem is an area where you have living things interacting. Now, an ecosystem doesn't need to be a huge thing. It doesn't need to be a whole ocean. Sometimes you have a small ecosystem, a pond ecosystem, or even in a log. You could have a rotting log that has its own ecosystem with different types of bacteria and fungi and things and insects living in it. So an ecosystem can be any size, really, big to small. You know, this aquarium back here with this algae and these plants, that's an ecosystem. It's an area, it has living things, non-living things, all sort of interacting. And when we think about an ecosystem, we kind of split it into a couple categories or groups within that. There's the community, which are the living things. The organisms. That's a term we're going to use a lot, organism. Just means a living thing. And it includes lots of stuff. So when I asked you in your question today, a lot of you mentioned animals. But don't just stop your thinking about organisms and animals. It's also fungus and bacteria and plants and protists, and all these other things are also living organisms. Sometimes we limit our thinking to just animals. So community is the living things. You know, if you think about like a neighborhood, it would be equivalent to like the people, the residents of that neighborhood. They would be the community. Versus on the other side, we have the habitat, basically like the area where these things live. The non-living parts. They would be the habitat. So we can imagine in the courtyard of our school is a small ecosystem. It has lots of things. It has some living organisms like the grass, the trees, the bushes, some ducks now, some insects and bees and things like that. They all make up the community of that courtyard. The habitat would be things like the soil out there, the air, the water that's in the soil. Those non-living parts are the habitat.
There are those giant bumblebees out there that hover in front of our home.
Yeah, big bumblebees, yeah. Now, sometimes when we're thinking about a community, we may talk about a single population within that community. When we talk about a population, we're always referring to one specific species. So out there is a population of mallard ducks. It's just 4 of them. 5
They're
of them.
mallard ducks?
Mallard. Those are mallards.
How do you know?
Just by the look of them. Have you seen mallard ducks? We talked about mallard ducks when we talked about male-female coloration differences. A male mallard is the kind with the green head, pretty bright and showy, but the females are just sort of brownish, drab color to help them camouflage. Bullfrogs in a pond, that would be a population because that's one species. If I say the fish in the ocean, that's not a single population. Why not?
Because there's many different.
Yeah, there's thousands and thousands of species of fish. Yeah, not just Fish is not a species. So we have to be specific if we're talking about a population.
Mr. Duro, I know you're a vegetarian. Do you ever eat seafood?
No, I don't eat seafood either.
Were you ever a non-vegetarian?
Yes.
Are you like a vegan?
No, I'm not a vegan.
Okay.
Just a regular
What's the
vegetarian.
difference?
A vegan
The
doesn't,
vegan, you can have anything.
doesn't eat any animal products at all, including milk, cheese, eggs.
So what do they?
I was
They
vegan
plant,
for
all plant
2.5
material.
hours,
So
guys.
it's like salad, lunch, breakfast, lunch.
Rice, pasta, you can eat other, there's other
And my mom
things.
was
Vegetables. Not always. Yes.
What if for the fertilizer?
Guys, shh.
What if for the fertilizer they use like manure? Can they still eat it?
Yeah.
Oh,
So wait, what's vegetarian?
well,
then?
not
They're just,
all
you
the
know,
time. There's
Like a regular vegetarian, I'm called an ovo-lacto-vegetarian, meaning ovo, eggs, lacto, milk, so I do eat eggs and milk. A vegan is somebody that does not eat those things. All right, anyway, well, I don't want to get into this conversation. So diversity. When we talk about an ecosystem, we will often talk about the diversity, or sometimes we say the biodiversity of that ecosystem. And this is just how many different types of living species are there. You know, the courtyard has a pretty low biodiversity. It's got, you know, like we said, some ducks and some plant species, some trees, some insects and stuff. But overall, there's not a large number of different species living in that courtyard, which makes sense. It's just a small enclosed area. What is an ecosystem you maybe have learned about that has a very high diversity? The ocean is a very large biodiversity. There's lots and lots of different species. There's another important one that often is used as an example, Tanya. Desert doesn't quite have as high a diversity as the ecosystem I was thinking of. The rainforest. Yeah, tropical rainforest is an extremely rich ecosystem with many, many species that live there. When we talk about an ecosystem, we sometimes talk about the biotic factors in that ecosystem and abiotic factors. And these are just terms, they're not too complicated. But biotic, you guys remember what I told you bio means, like biology?
Two.
No, that's just bi is two. But bio is a completely different.
Biochemistry.
It means life. So biotic factors are living things. So I bet you can guess what abiotic factors are. Right, they're non-living things. So, you know, if I think about an ecosystem, I might say the trees and the frogs and the ants and the bacteria, they're all biotic factors. Abiotic factors are non-living things. What would an example be? CJ?
Dead worms.
Okay, dead material. They're alive. The soil's not alive, Hannah? Rocks. Sun. Clouds, water, oxygen, all those things are non-living, but still an important part of that ecosystem. Even though it's not alive, it's still very important.
Why did you use for CO2, why did you use an oxygen, why did you use
I
the
don't know.
same?
I'm not sure. All right, so those are all abiotic factors.
Hold your horses, don't flip the slide.
And also these abiotic factors often determine what types of biotic factors can be there, what kind of living things can survive. At certain temperatures and oxygen levels and moisture, only certain species can survive because that's what they're adapted for. All right, so let's talk about energy. All ecosystems need a source of energy. And for almost all of them, it's the sun. The sun is really the base of all ecosystems. We trace back just about any energy in an ecosystem back to the sun eventually. And so we've used these terms before, right? Producer, consumer.
Oh, yeah.
Talked about way back. raise your hand if you think you could tell me, what is a producer? Daniel?
Somebody who makes stuff, or not somebody, but like a thing, a living or a dead, I guess, I don't know. But a thing that like gives stuff to the or sells stuff.
Cells?
Or,
Okay.
No. They make the stuff.
We're going to be a little more specific for what Daniel said. He's getting there. Olivia?
The tomato plant, it gives something. Right?
Tomato plant is a producer, but why is it a producer?
Because it makes its own products.
Well, let's get even more specific, not just products. Kristen?
Something that reproduces.
No.
It's still
Haley?
It's still energy.
Almost. Very close. Nate? What?
Nutrients.
Oh my god.
Olivia?
It gives some.
CJ?
Make some food.
That's best. Yes. A producer is an organism that can create its own, really, what did I say is better than food?
Water.
Water.
No, I said a certain, that's very general, that some things can make their own food. What do they actually make?
Glucose.
Yes, glucose. What is that process called?
Photosynthesis.
Good, photosynthesis. We also call them autotrophs. They use the sun's energy directly and use that to make glucose. Now, let's finish writing, then we'll do this. So, time for a second of review. Photosynthesis. So, it requires 3 things. What is one thing photosynthesis needs, Brianna? Yes, but what kind of energy? Sun's energy, or light energy. So it needs light. Matt?
Oh, it's water.
It needs water. And it needs a gas. Dana?
Oxygen.
Oh my god, Dan.
Ava? Yes, carbon dioxide.
No, I still.
So, we have oxygen, we have carbon dioxide, water, and light. If all those things are present, a producer can go through photosynthesis and make 2 things. What's one, Kristen?
Is it ATP?
No, you're thinking of respiration. Hannah?
Oxygen.
It makes oxygen and then it makes glucose. So light, carbon dioxide, and water produce glucose and oxygen. That's photosynthesis. That's what producers do. They can take energy from the sun and change it into glucose, basically. All right. Well, what do consumers do? Haley?
They take the energy or the stuff that the producers make and use it for themselves.
Yeah, they then, to get energy, a consumer has to eat something. Has to eat other organisms. You know, me, I eat producers.
You don't eat them.
And then we have another group. In an ecosystem, all living things eventually die. And that's where decomposers come in.
I'm gonna be the first one.
Decomposers are organisms, the other word for consumer is heterotroph. We talked about those. Decomposers, they basically take dead material and waste products and break them down, return their nutrients back to the soil. Does anybody at their home have a compost pile? CJ, you do?
Yes.
Alright, so CJ, tell me what a compost pile is.
It's a little, well, it doesn't actually need like what we have in, but we have this black compost box.
Yep.
And you put in like, we do eggshells and like stuff that's like overused, like dead tomatoes and stuff like that dried up. And then it sits there and like, it creates soil and it gives food, it gives like worms and stuff food.
Good. Yeah, so compost is when you take food waste that you have,
Oh, let me make this.
hold on, or waste from your garden or whatever, and you put it in a pile, and decomposers, things like bacteria and fungi, break down, you know, if you threw a bunch of bananas in there that were spoiled, they would break them down, and they return the nutrients back to the soil. After a while, if you mix up your compost pile, eventually it's like soil. And that soil is very rich in nutrients because decomposers broke down that dead stuff and return the nutrients back to the soil. It happens all the time. If a squirrel dies in your backyard somewhere, it eventually is gone. It decomposes. Basically, insects, bacteria, fungi consumed it and returned those nutrients back to the soil for recycling. So fungi and bacteria are basically our main decomposers. Yeah?
Would a dairying beetle, after it like buries a mouse, not a good mouse, would that kind of help?
Yeah, kind of. All right, now one important thing that you guys are going to have to learn to do, and I think you've probably done this, are create food chains and food webs. Have you guys done this?
Yes.
All right. Now, does anybody know the difference between a food chain and a food web? Holly?
Food chain is more specific, like it has specific, like a food web is more, right?
Okay, a food web is more complex.
Okay, kind of like food web is more complex because of a lot of different things. Where the food chain, it's a
Why do you think the
All right,
fish would
CJ.
Like there's only like one
Yes.
set of things where the food web, like everything's like.
Yeah, good. A food chain basically says this eats this, which eats this, whereas a food web shows multiple options and more complex interactions between these organisms. And it's showing basically the transfer of energy in the ecosystem, how energy gets from one organism to another. We call these predator-prey relationships because it shows what's eating what. What should be at the start of all food chains and food webs? They all have to start with something. Nate? No? Humans are usually at the end. Alex? We usually don't include the sun, but you're on the right track. We usually don't have the sun in a food web, but what's going to be right, what can use the sun? Plants. Usually producers are the first thing in our food chain, food web. Okay? And the important thing is that the direction of the arrows sometimes confuses people. The arrow always points from what was eaten to what ate it. Sometimes if you're having trouble, think about the arrows pointing like the grass is going into the mouse's mouth. That's why the arrow points to the mouse. The mouse goes into the hawk's mouth. That's why the arrow points to the hawk.
Or snake.
All right, so let's look at an example. If I have some wheat, wheat is a plant, a producer, an autotroph. It uses the sun's energy. Why are there no arrows pointing to it?
Because
Because
it's eating.
It doesn't eat anything. It doesn't eat anything. It makes its own food. It's photosynthesis. All right, let's say it's eaten by a mouse.
Don't mouse like
A mouse would be a consumer, a heterotroph, because it's not making its own food. It's eating another organism, the wheat. Snake eats the mouse. The eagle eats the snake.
a bear eats eagle.
So we could stop eventually. There's not really anything that is a predator of an eagle. We call those things the top carnivores because nothing really eats them, usually. So the
Don't people
wheat's
eat 'em?
the producer.
Everything.
Everything else is a consumer.
Chill out.
And sometimes we label the consumers as to what level they are. So we have producer, then we have a first level consumer, second level consumer, third level. Now I am always a, which level?
First.
I'm always a first level consumer. You will sometimes be a first level consumer if you're eating plants, but if you eat buffalo chicken pizza today, the chicken is a first level consumer, and when you eat the chicken, you're second level
So what
consumer.
if we eat a buffalo? What if
Then you're a second level consumer.
Wait,
still?
wait, what do you mean first, second?
What if you like,
Buffaloes are grazers, they
what if
eat
you,
grass.
like,
If you eat a trout, you're a third level consumer. Because trout eat smaller fish usually plant matter, so you're a third level.
what's like the biggest level consumer you can be by eating something?
I mean, it could, I don't know. Generally, you're not gonna be more than third level.
Wait, what do you mean?
Because as you go up, not much eats those bigger organs.
What do you mean?
Like this, look at our food chain, Dano. So the first, hold on. The first level consumer is the first thing that eats the producer. The second level consumer eats the first level consumer. The third level consumer eats the second level. So how many sort of steps you have to go through?
We would be the act because we would eat like.
If you ate an eagle, what would you eat?
Fourth level.
Fourth level. Well, but if,
There, yeah. What would that be?
depends what you eat. All right. Let's finish up with this slide. All right, here are some terms you need to know. And I think you probably know all of them, or almost all of them. You have questions, Dana?
Yes.
All right, raise your hand if you can tell me, what is an herbivore? Ava? Something that eats only plants. Raise your hand, please, if you can tell me, what is a carnivore, Farhan? It only eats animals. When we talk about carnivores, we usually talk about the predator and the prey. The predator is the hunter, the prey is the hunted, the thing that gets eaten.
Most people are carnivores.
Not really.
Because like even if all you ate was cheeseburgers, it's sort of like lettuce and bread and stuff.
All right, most humans are the next category. Raise your hand if you could tell me what an omnivore is.
Both.
Tommy?
Both plants and animals.
They eat both plants and animals. Heterotroph? Give me another word we learned today that is the same as a heterotroph. Brianna? Consumer. Something that has to go out and find food. Can't make its own. And autotroph, Dano?
It produces its own food.
Yeah, it's a producer. Something uses the sun to make food. Sorry, I'll go back. Oh, actually, I want to get this last slide too. Sorry.
Oh my
Oh, yeah, I'll go back. Sorry. There we go.
I'm hungry. Just let me believe. I'm
Crazy. My mind is just throw our way.
All right, so you guys explained earlier, a food web is like a food chain that we just draw. Here's a food chain, and in this food chain, we have some very tiny little microscopic plants. We have tiny things that eat them, insects eat those, and fish, and other fish, and fishermen. So listen, if these are, what would these things be? Producers. Then this would be first level, second level, third, fourth. So human eats this, it's a fifth level consumer.
That's awesome. Wait, Mr. Joyce, you know what level consumer I would be?
No. All right, a food web is like a food chain, but just more complex. It shows multiple sources of food for each species. You know, in this case, the shrimp eats the plant. The crayfish also eats the plant. The fish eats the shrimp, but what you see is that many of the organisms have multiple food sources. This is more realistic, because in real life, most species don't eat only one specific food. It's kind of made as several food chains connected together. If I look at this food web, one food chain might be plant, crayfish, egret. Another food chain, plant, shrimp, fish, egret. All right, and then the last thing. If you think about our courtyard ecosystem I was just describing. What's the most abundant organism probably out there? What's they're the most of in the courtyard? Haley?
Grass.
Probably grass. If you think about a forest, what's the most abundant organism?
Either trees or grass.
Yeah, trees or plants. What about in a desert? Well, that's not living, so.
Lizard?
I think there's the most lizards. Haley? Yeah, cactuses.
Isn't it cactus?
The most abundant organism in a food in any ecosystem is always the producer. There's always the most producers. Because every time one organism eats another, energy is lost. So when something eats the plants, it only uses about 10% of the energy. And so when something eats that consumer, again, it can only get about 10% of the energy. So the higher you go up the food chain, the more energy that you're losing. So if you think about a big forest, yes, there would be lots of maple trees, okay, and lots of oak trees. Then maybe there's the next round of squirrels which eat the oak trees. Then maybe you have owls that eat the snake, and there wouldn't be tons of them. And then maybe there's one top predator, a wolf, but that would eat those. If you think about it, in any ecosystem, if you think about a big predator, a lion, do you see herds of lions running around?
Yeah, always.
No. Think about an eagle. Do you see flocks of eagles all over? No, they're very solitary. There's not that many of these carnivores.